Hello, ninth grade. Today we're going to talk about logical fallacies. Now, this logical fallacies segment is the last portion that we'll be doing in this unit. Remember that this unit is rhetoric and propaganda. And we started it when phase 3 began on April 29th. We started by talking about propaganda, and you remember that one of the types of propaganda that we discussed was logical fallacies. So what we're doing now is we're actually drilling down a little bit deeper into that and talking about the different types of logical fallacies. Now there's a lot of different types out there, but we're going to look at 8 in particular because we want it to, stay manageable. So we're going to look at 8 types of logical fallacies, okay? And as you know from your rhetorical strategies from the ethos, pathos, logos, the logical fallacies are an error in logos, right? Because they're an error in logic, okay? So this information is on a PowerPoint on the portal, and it's also in handout form on the portal as well. So if you have access to a printer, you might want to print that out, or because it's a 2-page handout, you could easily screenshot it and have it on your phone, because the homework activity that you're going to do today and then the classwork activity that you're going to do tomorrow, both of those would be helped out by having this information readily available to you. Okay, so you might want to do that. Okay, let's go. So the first one that we're going to talk about is called slippery slope. The definition of the slippery slope logical fallacy is that this is a conclusion based on the premise that if A happens, then eventually, through a series of small steps, through B, C, etc., X, Y, and Z will happen too, basically equating A and Z. Therefore, as the fallacy claims, if we don't want Z to occur, then A must not be allowed to occur either. So I'll give you an example so you know what we're talking about. Somebody might say something like, if we ban Hummers because they're bad for the environment, eventually the government will ban all cars, so we should not ban Hummers. So in this example, the author is equating banning Hummers with banning all cars, but that's not really the same thing. We see this a lot. Another example that's very similar to that would be, for instance, with various gun laws. Somebody might say, well, if they try to restrict, what types of guns we can buy or who can buy them, then they're going to take away our guns altogether. So that's a very slippery slope, because in order for that to happen, there's a lot of steps that would have to come in line in between there, okay? So you need to recognize when someone is trying to use the slippery slope logical fallacy on you. And remember, what makes these so insidious is the fact that they sound logical on the surface. You have to dig a little deeper to realize that it's actually an error in logic, okay? And so this is so important for you, just as a citizen of the world, to be able to be aware when someone in an argument or, in an ad or a newspaper article or anything like that is actually guilty of a logical fallacy, okay? So that's the first one. The second one is called hasty generalization. This fallacy is a conclusion based on insufficient or biased evidence. In other words, you're rushing to a conclusion before you have all the relevant facts. That's why it's called hasty generalization, okay? Example, even though it's only the first day, I can tell this is going to be a boring course. Okay, that is an error in logic, and it is based on hasty generalization. In this example, the author is basing their evaluation of the entire course on only one class from the first day. And first days are always boring. You just go over the syllabus and, talk about what the rules of the class are. So to make a fair and reasonable evaluation on whether the class is going to be good or not, the author would have to attend several classes, maybe look through their textbook, maybe talk to the professor, or maybe talk to other people who have already finished the course in order to have a sufficient evidence on which to base a conclusion. Okay? So hasty generalization is anytime you're rushing to a conclusion without all of the facts that you need. Okay? The third type of logical fallacy, and this one's kind of fun to say, it's a little odd because it's a Latin term. And you will see a lot of Latin terms used in logical fallacies, just like you do in legal systems, okay, in any type of legal documentation. So this one is post hoc ergo propter hoc. Okay, and that is Latin. And basically it's saying this type of logical fallacy is a conclusion that assumes if A occurred before B, then B must have caused A. Excuse me, if A occurred after B, then B must have caused A. For instance, I drank bottled water and now I'm sick, so the water must have made me sick. Okay, so you can see how this is a logical fallacy. In this example, the author assumes that if one event chronologically followed another, the first event must have caused the second. But that's not necessarily the case. The illness could have been caused by the burrito they ate the night before, a flu bug that had been working on the body for days, a chemical spill across campus. I mean, any number of things. There's no reason without more evidence to assume the water caused the person to be sick. It's kind of like you will hear some people say sometimes, oh, I'm not going to get the flu shot. I got it one time and I got the flu, or I got sick. Well, knowing what we know on, well, first of all, that's impossible because it's a dead virus, but knowing what we know about how long it takes for you to get the flu, you probably had already been exposed before you got the flu shot. So that's a good example of that post hoc, ergo propter hoc. It's just saying just because this came before it, then that caused it. Like another example, let's say you wore the wrong socks to school on the day that we said this is going to be our last day of school. And so you're like, oh, I shouldn't have worn those socks. That's the reason school got canceled for the rest of the year. And you see that happen sometimes with sports and stuff, don't you? You know what I mean? Like, oh, I didn't have my lucky socks on, so that's why we didn't win. So it's just assuming that one thing happened before and that caused the other thing, but it's often not the case. Okay? The next type is called genetic fallacy. This type of logical fallacy is a conclusion based on an argument that the origins of a person, idea, institute, or theory determine its character, nature, or worth. This is where racism is housed, okay? Racism is inherently illogical. It's a logical fallacy, and this is where we see it. For example, the Volkswagen Beetle is an evil car because it was originally designed by Hitler's army. I don't know if that's true or not. I didn't create these examples. But you can see how that would be illogical. You know, just because if it was created by Hitler's army, and it is a German car, then that doesn't necessarily mean it's an evil car, just because the people, Hitler and the people who served under him may have been evil, okay? Another example would be like somebody saying, oh, he's Catholic, so he can't understand the tenets of Judaism. Also not logical. In the first example, the author is equating the character of a car with the character of the people who built the car. In the second example, the author is assuming that being one religion means you can have no knowledge of the other religion. Okay? So this is where they are, somebody is actually guilty of a logical fallacy because they are trying to figure out whether they believe you or don't believe you, or consider you worthy or not, or what you produce worthy or not, based on the person, the origin of the person, idea, or institute, or theory. Okay? Next up is circular argument. This one seems like it's proving the argument, but when you really look a little more deeply, you realize nothing was really said. They're talking in circles. You may have heard that expression. So this is when you just restate the argument in different words rather than actually proving it. And if you pay attention, you'll see people do this a lot. So for instance, an example might be, George Bush is a good communicator because he speaks effectively. You really just gave us the definition for being a good communicator. You know what I mean? Like, you said the same thing twice. You didn't explain what made him a good communicator. So, like it says, in this example, the conclusion that Bush is a good communicator and the evidence used to prove it, he speaks effectively, that's saying the same thing in different words. Specific evidence would be needed here, like saying he uses everyday language, he breaks down complex problems, so that the average person can understand them, or he illustrates his points with humorous stories. Something like that would be needed to prove that he's a good communicator. Okay? So you want to make sure you're proving your argument, not just restating your argument. The next one is false dichotomy, which is also often referred to as either or. This one you see so often. All of these you see so often. False dichotomy is a fallacy where a conclusion oversimplifies the argument by reducing it to only two sides or choices, We see this happen so often. People are like, well, it's either this or it's this. But as you're starting to learn, as you learn more about the world, things are rarely that cut and dried. They're very rarely that simple. Often it's going to be the case where, there's lots of shades of gray in there. There's lots of other possible solutions or reasons or whatever it is you happen to be debating. So to give you an example, somebody might say, we can either stop using cars or destroy the earth. Again, it's not that black and white. There's lots of in between. We could perhaps, go to a fuel source that's not gasoline and still use vehicles, but not have them run on fossil fuels. There's a lot of gray in there. There's a lot of different things you can do. You don't have to get rid of cars altogether. So in this example, you've got two choices presented as the only options, and the author ignores that there's really actually a range of choices in between. Like in this example, you could develop cleaner technology, you could use car sharing systems for necessities and emergencies, or maybe better community planning to discourage daily driving. There's a lot that can be done. So you'll see that people do this one a lot. They try to break it down to it's either this or this. And that's very rarely the case in a more complex issue. Okay? The next one is called ad hominem. That's another one of those fun Latin phrases, right? This is an attack on the character of a person rather than their opinions or an argument. So you maybe can't attack their argument or what they stand for or what their opinion is. So instead you're going to attack who they are as a person. Unfortunately, this has become status quo for political ads. I know you've seen it. Instead of talking about the other candidates, plans or their ideas for what they're going to do if they hold office, you're just attacking the character of the person. You're saying they're not a good person because of this, this, and this. We see this all the time, okay? So you want to be aware that that is a logical fallacy. So an example would be something like Greenpeace's strategies aren't effective because they're all dirty, lazy hippies. Well, obviously, you're not talking about Greenpeace's strategies or what Greenpeace stands for or what they're trying to do as an organization. You're just saying that, the people who make up the organization are dirty, lazy hippies, which is 100% attacking the character of the people, not looking at the policies of the organization. Okay? So you see that all the time in political ads. It's very frustrating. Once you understand all these fallacies, when you try to watch a debate or look at political ads and things like that, you get so frustrated because you're like, can y'all please just stop using these logical fallacies and just give us the actual information? That'd be great. Thank you. But you're going to notice them. Now that you know what they are, you're going to start seeing them. Okay? Next up is red herring. This one is so funny. This one's used a lot. My mom helped me remember this one whenever I was growing up by telling me that it's like, imagine you've got a dog who's on the scent of a particular, whatever it is he's after, a fox or a rabbit or whatever. And once he's locked in on that scent, like if it's a good bloodhound, like he's following that scent until he gets to the actual thing he's chasing. So the idea of a red herring, because a herring is a type of fish, is that you throw the red herring in his path and he gets distracted. He stops going after the smell of the rabbit or whatever he was chasing because the herring smells so strongly and so good to him that he focuses on that instead. Okay? So that kind of gives you a visual for this. Red herring is a diversionary tactic. It's where you're creating a diversion, and so you avoid the key issues, often by putting out opposing arguments and dealing with them rather than addressing the actual argument. So you throw something else out there instead of dealing with the real argument. And we do this all the time. You've done this with your parents, I'm sure. It's very common. Like, your parent will say, why didn't you load the dishwasher? I told you to load the dishwasher. And you'll say, well, my sibling didn't take the trash out. That doesn't really have anything to do with whether you loaded the dishwasher or not. You're trying to distract your parent. You're throwing that red herring out there so that maybe they'll get distracted by the fact that your sibling also didn't do what they were supposed to do instead of punishing you. Okay? So a real life example would be something like, the level of mercury in seafood may be unsafe, but if we ban fishing in the oceans, what will fishers do to support their families? Well, that's a red herring because you're throwing out the whole idea of, you have to support this industry that, feeds a bunch of people. You got a bunch of people who are, fishermen and so if they're not able to do that, then how are they going to make a living? Instead of dealing with the problem of the level of mercury in seafood, you're throwing out that red herring, okay? So like I said, in this one, you're switching the discussion away from the safety of the food and instead talking about an economic issue. It's not that that's not a valid issue. It is. It's just that instead of dealing with the issue that was raised, you threw that red herring to divert the attention to a different issue and so that you didn't have to deal with the one currently at hand. Okay? So, those are the 8 types of logical fallacies that we're going to be working with. Now, today, I need you to go to your portal page and go to quizzes, and you're going to log in and you're going to complete a homework activity based on these definitions. You can use this PowerPoint. You can use the handout that I've put on the portal that's this same information. It's just in handout form instead of the PowerPoint. I want you to use them because I want you to really make sure you're paying attention and that you're understanding how the definitions relate to the terms, okay? So pay close attention to that because tomorrow you're going to have an actual classwork activity where you try to recognize some examples of these, okay? Have a good day.